I want to bring in Kadia Goba, political reporter for Semafor, and who was on the panel interviewing former President Trump yesterday. Also with us, MSNBC political analyst and former Democratic representative from Maryland, Donna Edwards, and former GOP strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Rick Wilson. Kadia, I want to start with you since you were on that panel yesterday. These comments, really nothing new for Donald Trump, as he was the chief propagator of President Obama's birther conspiracy theories. That's really what launched his own political career. But did anything you heard surprise you?
Yeah, I hadn't heard this whole Kamala Harris isn't black thing before. So that was actually surprising. And as the news or as the day went on, I understood that this seems to be a new attack line, positioning her as this person who flip-flops on things. However, it kind of initiated with her flip-flopping on her identity, however misleading and false that is, and her educational background. But yeah, it was a little surprising, a little stark, especially in a room of many, many black journalists and on stage with 3 black journalists interviewing the former president.
Congresswoman, what went through your mind when you heard these comments?
Well, it was staggering, actually. I mean, I think that Donald Trump continues to struggle with the way it is that he is going to run with Kamala Harris as an opponent. But it really showed his lack about the way America is. I mean, he's never, I guess, heard the term biracial before. I think, Kamala Harris identifies as both an Indian woman and a black woman. She went to a historically black college and university, Howard University. And so I just think that Donald Trump continues to dig himself into a hole when it comes to challenging Kamala Harris. And frankly, he seems quite out of step with the rest of America.
And Rick, the Trump campaign, however, is not trying to backpedal. In fact, they appear to be leaning all the way into these comments. In fact, Donald Trump's still putting out social media posts today, essentially echoing what he said in those remarks about Kamala Harris turning black more recently. How do you explain that? Is this part of his strategy?
There's no real strategy underneath this. There's a great division in the campaign right now. The professionals like Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita want Donald Trump to please, please, please shut the hell up. They understand that this drives voters away. They understand it's political poison. They understand that Donald Trump cannot be controlled, however. He does not know how to run against Vice President Harris. He does not have a strategy or a plan. This is Donald Trump's lizard brain telling him what to do. And he's trapped in the feedback loop with his audience who do want the racial hatred, who do want the owning the libs act, the act that he was trying to do. They do want the ugliness and the nasty remarks and the ugly comments. That's something they've been programmed to get from him, and they give him feedback on it, and he keeps doing it. It's a very powerful drug for him. And I want to also make one more comment. The idea of somebody being biracial in this country is as natural as anything now. This is not 1950 or 1850, Donald. But, Donald Trump is a guy who isn't one, but identifies as a billionaire. He isn't one, but he identifies as a strong leader. I mean, it's an absurdity that he thinks that someone can't define who they are from both sides of their family tree.
What I don't understand, though, is why he'd be leaning into this, because if it's about political instincts, doesn't this just alienate undecided voters who maybe were, turned off by these types of comments in 2016 and 2020?
They're terrible instincts, and he's always gotten away with a lot of this in the past. But right now he is facing a formidable candidate who is connecting with America at a level that he no longer is able to achieve. And it's making him insane. It's driving him completely out of his mind. And as every day passes, he's going to get worse and worse. No one should expect the new tone or a better Donald Trump. There is no better Donald Trump.
Kadia, how do you think race will be a part of this 2024 campaign going forward?
I didn't expect this, but it seems to be ramping up. As you mentioned, Donald Trump is playing into this, and now we see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene also throwing her hand in the also tweeting out things that are race-based. And as you mentioned before, the party's sort of split on this. I do think that Democrats will actually not do this or kind of stay away and pivot towards whatever underlying issue they say, they'll probably say Republicans are, unable to, talk about anything else because they have no policies. I think they'll stay away from that and let Republicans just run with this, sadly, to the detriment of their own party, because as you mentioned, this might be great fodder for the base. It is not going to be good for independents or people on the fence of whether or not they'll vote for Trump over Kamala Harris.
Rick, let's talk about the Veep stakes, because we're expecting Vice President Harris to announce her VP pick any day now. Her campaign's already talked about events scheduled with her running mate next week. With those independent voters, with those people who are on the fence or are undecided right now about what they're going to do for this election, who do you think would best broaden Harris's support?
Look, I think you've got an embarrassment of riches right now for Vice President Harris to choose from, to choose her vice president, to choose her running mate. You've got people who have been tremendously effective. Mark Kelly in the Senate on border issues, on national security issues. You've got Josh Shapiro, one of the best governors in the country, who has made the commitment as a governor not to play politics with it, but to go in and build roads and bridges, do the things that people need to have done. You've got Waltz, who could be a tremendous forward-facing person. He's a great communicator. You have a lot of great people that are on the list and that may not be publicly on the list, all of whom are able to go out there and post up not only to show that they could be a part of an effective Harris administration, but also as a counterpoint to the single worst vice presidential candidate of all time, including Sarah Palin and Dan Quayle, in the form of J.D. Vance. I think any of those folks that are being discussed right now could take J.D. Vance to the woodshed politically when it comes down to a head-to-head comparison or in a debate. So I think she's got a lot of great choices ahead, and I think any one of them is going to show a superior connection to Americans than J.D. Vance, who has spent the first 10 days of his role as a vice presidential candidate alienating women, cat owners, and every other form of American he can find to insult.